My name is Ashley Prime. I'm a retired diplomat. I used to work at the Foreign Office. My father's name was also Ashley Prime. He was in the Royal Signals during the war in Singapore, and initially he was in Changi Jail, but then was transshipped with the Japanese to Burma and Thailand, where he spent the bulk of the war. He was taken around to various prisoner of war camps where he helped build the railway, the Burma to Thailand railway. It was a very, very difficult time. Almost no medicine, there was very limited food supplies. He suffered a lot, but thankfully he survived. About 15 months before the end of the war, he was taken in, actually through Manila to Osaka with the Japanese, and a number of the troop ships were actually sunk by the Allies, and they docked in Osaka, and they had to get from Osaka port to the other side of the city. So he got on the tube with everybody else, and he said they just averted their eyes. He said they didn't acknowledge us, just got off the tube at the other side and then got on some troop buses and troop trucks across from Osaka out to Iruka, which of course is in the middle of nowhere. And this copper mine in Iruka, from what I understand, was kind of uneconomic in peacetime, but they used the labour available. And the difference there, I think, with him was that a lot of the people who guarded them were just students, irregular, Japanese, boys and girls actually, and they were much kinder and much more compassionate, and would often bring them food, whereas that was something he had just never experienced, in Burma and Thailand, where life was a lot tougher. So I mean, a lot of his colleagues just didn't make it. Either they in the middle of the jungle with no medicine, a lot died of cholera. Or in worst case scenarios, were executed. If you sort of misbehave for a minor misdemeanor, you'd be put in a sort of wooden cage and just left for sort of 48 hours. And he had to bury one of his mates. They went to a little sort of clearing in the jungle, dug a hole in the monsoon weather. Of course, there was no supplies or anything, so the guy who had died was wrapped up in a sheet, but they needed that sheet. They couldn't just, bury him in it. And he said after they dug the grave, they put his body in, but it fell upside down, and he said we couldn't get into the grave to sort of turn him the right way up. And the Japanese were just very concerned that we got the sheet back. And he said after the war, I went to see his family who were in the north of England. He said, but I just didn't have the heart to tell him exactly what had happened. I just said we gave him a Christian burial, and we prayed for him at his graveside, but I just didn't have the heart to say we didn't bury him the right way up. So yeah, these are my father's letters, which he started writing in the early 1980s, and it came out of a random conversation I had with him. I said, you never talked about the war? And he said, no, I didn't. But then he started writing, and he wrote and wrote and wrote. There's the letter from the King when he came back to the UK, his interrogation in Canada document, his record card, and these, which I suppose are probably the most sort of, emotional for me. And these were the prisoners of war cards that my dad wrote to my mother. I'm working, I'm not working, I'm in number 6 camp in Thailand. I'm working for me, I'm not working for pay, please see that Anne, that's my sister, is taken care of. So he kept everything, which was great, and passed them all on to me. And I think this is important as well. This was a handwritten note of the Japanese students, the young boys and girls who lived in Iruka, which they gave my dad when he was liberated. So I think I'm going to take this with me to Iruka and hopefully see if we can find, some of the children, grandchildren of the people who had guarded my father. In fact, my father says here, names and address of students who were guards in the camp in Iruka. Honda was the one that told me that there were plans to execute us in the event of US troops landing in Japan. The Iruka Boys was just a sort of a general term for those who were taken from Burma and Thailand and who ended up in Japan, in Iruka, working in this copper mine. And I think there were sort of various tasks. You could be a miner, or you could work in the sort of the foundry there. I think he did bits of, we worked in the foundry, he wasn't much good at that, so he actually ended up working as a miner, which of course he had no kind of skill set for. And before the end of the war, before August 1945, before liberation, he said that the Japanese had told him that if they lost the war and the Americans invaded, they would all be executed. But thankfully, the Americans arrived in time and liberated them. When my father was liberated, he went across the Pacific. You would instinctively think, actually, you'd want to go home, but he didn't do that. He wrote that he was never physically or mentally ready to go back. So he went the wrong way around, actually, across the Pacific, across Canada, and across the Atlantic. He wrote about crossing Canada. He got off the train at Toronto, and the railway station, Central Station in Toronto, is still there today. And I lived in Toronto. I was with the Foreign Office there. And I used to go to the railway station, quite regularly, and just standing in that hallway thinking, God, Dad, you were here, So, emotional. Even though I spent a great chunk of my career out in Asia, I don't know Japan. I've never visited Japan, so I'm looking forward to going later this year. I think for me, it's a bit of an open book, really. Going to and spending time at Iruka and just seeing a place where my father lived for, 15 months and survived. And, some of his compatriots didn't. I mean, quite a few are buried there still. And just trying to get my head around what that was like, how we still owe that generation a debt for our freedom. So, but on a personal basis, it'd be hugely emotional for me. 100% you have to deal with the past, you have to accept the responsibility of what happened, but you have to look at forgiveness too, and that's tough. Part of our upbringing, part of our nature is to sort of hold on to that anger and that bitterness, but you do have to forgive, otherwise you just repeat, the sins of the past. And my father wrote about this, about forgiveness, and when I was younger as a child I didn't understand it so much, but do now. Even though he'd gone through some really traumatic experiences, all I knew from my father was a good, kind, compassionate, empathetic dad. He said to me, look, if you don't, it's very personal, if you don't forgive, you will carry that anger and that bitterness and it'll eat you up. Yeah, he talked a lot about forgiving. I think that defined the rest of his life, actually, and a tough thing to do and a brave thing to do. And I think it's something you do with your heart. It's an emotional thing. Your head doesn't want to forgive, it doesn't want to forget, but part of that healing has to come from the heart and it has to be genuine.